What would you do if your own son took out a life insurance policy on you, then invited you on a hike you were never meant to return from? I raised him, loved him, gave him everything, and he called me dead weight. But what he didn't know, I had already written the final chapter. He just didn't realize he was the villain. Subscribe for more shocking family drama stories you won't believe are real. What would you do if your own son took out a life insurance policy on you, then invited you on a hike you were never meant to return from? I raised him, loved him, gave him everything, and he called me dead weight. But what he didn't know, I had already written the final chapter. He just didn't realize he was the villain. My name is Margaret Dawson, and I spent most of my life playing two roles: single mother and invisible woman. I raised my son Ryan, alone after walking out of a marriage that nearly broke me. I took odd jobs, skipped vacations, wore the same winter coat for 8 years just so I could save up for Ryan's future. He was adopted when he was just a baby, left behind in the hospital by parents who never came back. I never told him the full story, never thought he needed to know. I just wanted him to grow up believing he was chosen, not abandoned. And for a while that belief made everything worth it. Ryan was a bright kid, quiet, observant. He clung to me like I was his whole world, and I lived like that was enough. When he got older he became distant, but I told myself it was normal. Teenagers drift. College kids are busy. Adult sons have lives. Still, I helped him with rent, covered his car insurance when he missed payments, even paid off his credit cards twice without asking questions. He married Emily 5 years ago and I barely saw him after that. She always had this way of smiling through her teeth, like politeness was a performance and I was the audience she couldn't wait to dismiss. So when Ryan called me one day and said Emily was pregnant, I cried. Not because I was excited, but because I thought maybe, just maybe, this would bring us back together. He told me things were tight financially. Of course I offered to help. I wired them $330,000 the next morning. It was a huge chunk of my retirement savings, money I had scraped together over decades working as a private caregiver for the wealthy. But this was my son. My only child. My only family. The next day I called to check in. I wanted to hear his voice again just to feel close. He answered quickly, upbeat and carefree, like he hadn't just emptied my life savings into his bank account. "Thanks, Mom," he said flatly, like he was brushing off a favor, not accepting a fortune. I told him to take care of Emily and the baby, and right before he hung up I heard something that stopped my heart cold. "Finally, the old lady sent the money," Emily said, laughing in the background. I held the phone in silence. I waited for Ryan to defend me, to scold her even gently. But all I heard was his voice, low and bitter. "Took long enough. We had to fake a pregnancy just to squeeze it out of her." My knees gave out. I sat down on the floor, still holding the phone to my ear as the call disconnected. Everything I had believed about my son shattered in that moment. This wasn't just ingratitude. It wasn't just a lie. This was betrayal. Calculated, coordinated, and heartless. I spent the rest of the day staring at the walls of my living room. My house was quiet. Always was. Too quiet. Ryan hadn't visited me in over a year. Emily never once called to ask how I was doing. They didn't care. They never did. I just didn't want to see it. 2 days later there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Ryan and Emily standing there with gift bags and wide smiles, pretending everything was fine. Ryan handed me a small bag with vitamins and said, "Thought we'd stop by. Wanted to see how you were doing." Emily leaned in, giving me that rehearsed grin. "Ryan talks about you all the time, Margaret. He's just been so busy with work. But we're really grateful for all you've done." I almost laughed. The performance was flawless. They were still pretending Emily was pregnant. Still playing the roles of loving son and daughter-in-law. And I was done playing mine. But I didn't show it. I smiled back and invited them in. "Of course. Come on in. Let's catch up." As they walked into my home, their eyes darted around like tourists scoping out a rental. They sat down on the couch they used to jump on as kids. Ryan folded his hands and said almost too casually, "So, with the baby coming, the apartment's a little cramped. We were thinking maybe we could stay here for a while." Emily jumped in, her voice soft and sugary. "Just until the baby's born, of course. It would mean the world to us." I knew what they wanted. My house. My money. My life. But I smiled. "Of course. You're always welcome here." Their eyes lit up like slot machines. And that's when I knew. They had no idea I already knew. They thought I was still the same naive, lonely woman willing to give up everything for a piece of love. They were wrong. For the first few days they played the perfect couple. Emily floated around the kitchen in silk robes, humming lullabies while making me tea, always careful to show off her fake baby bump beneath oversized sweaters. Ryan vacuumed, which he hadn't done once since he was 14. They even offered to clean out the garage and get the nursery ready. I watched in silence, memorizing every move. They thought they were charming me into handing over everything I had left. But behind every kind gesture was calculation. Behind every smile, teeth. I told them I'd start the process of transferring the house, in case anything happened to me. Emily clapped her hands like a game show contestant. That would be amazing, Margaret. It would give us so much peace of mind. Her eyes never quite reached mine. That night, I pretended to be asleep on the couch while they whispered in the kitchen. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I just couldn't help it. As soon as I heard Emily's voice, low and sharp, I knew the act was slipping. "She's stalling," she hissed. "We need to speed this up." Ryan exhaled loudly. "Relax. Once the paperwork's signed, it's done. Then we just wait for the hike." My blood ran cold. The hike. A week ago, Ryan had suggested we go hiking together for old time's sake. Thought it was odd. He hadn't invited me on anything since he got married. But now it made sense. Emily said something else. Something that made my chest tighten. "Do it on the ridge trail. Slippery rocks, no guardrails. One wrong step. Open and shut accident." There was. They were planning to kill me. And not just kill me, make it look like an accident, probably while I was still smiling, thinking my son wanted to spend time with me. I couldn't breathe. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stay quiet. I lay there in the dark, shaking, pretending to sleep while my only child plotted my death 10 feet away. When I finally crept back to my room, I locked the door and sat on the floor. I stared at the framed photo of us from when Ryan graduated high school. He looked so proud in his gown, his arm around my shoulders. I remembered how he whispered, "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." Where did that boy go? Where did I go wrong? Maybe it was when I started fixing his problems instead of letting him fix them himself. Or when I paid off his first gambling debt and called it love. Or when I let him think consequences were optional if you cried hard enough. But the part that broke me, the part that made me feel like I'd swallowed glass, was remembering how he used to hold my hand in parking lots, terrified of getting lost. Now I was the one about to disappear. The next morning, Rusty was gone. Rusty, my old golden retriever, my companion of 12 years, who slept at the foot of my bed and greeted me with tail wags and cloudy eyes every morning. His bed was empty. His leash was missing. His bowl untouched. I rushed out the back door, calling his name until my voice cracked. Nothing. No barking. No scratch at the door. Just silence. When I turned back into the house, Ryan was eating cereal on the couch like nothing had happened. "Where's Rusty?" I asked, voice brittle. He shrugged. "I took him out this morning. Dumped him somewhere. He was old. Couldn't keep pissing on the carpet forever." He didn't even look up. I stood there frozen, cereal milk dripping from his spoon onto the couch as if nothing had shifted. But everything had. Rusty was the last piece of unconditional love I had left in that house. And Ryan had thrown it away like garbage. That night, I opened the drawer in the guest room where Emily kept her prenatal vitamins. It was empty. The bottles were full of jelly beans. I checked her bathroom cabinet. No prenatal anything. Just diet pills, concealer, and a used pregnancy test. Negative. There was no baby. Never had been. It was all part of the act. The story. The setup. The lies wrapped in lullabies and baby name lists and Pinterest nursery boards. They had planned every inch of this. The money. The house. The hike. The death. They had no idea I knew. And I had no intention of letting them get away with it. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, hearing their muffled laughter from the other room, and made my decision. I would go on the hike. I would smile. I would let them believe I was still the woman they thought they could fool. But I would not be the one falling off that cliff. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask why. I simply started planning. The next morning, I made scrambled eggs with extra cheese, Ryan's favorite, and told them I'd been thinking about the hike. "You're right," I said with a soft smile. "We should go. One last adventure together before the baby arrives." Emily looked surprised for half a second, then covered it with a grin so wide it almost split her face. "That's wonderful, Margaret. We'll make it special." I told them I'd pack us a picnic. I even asked which trail they had in mind. "The Ridge," Ryan said too quickly. "Views are incredible. We'll bring a camera." I nodded, pretending not to notice the way his eyes slid toward Emily's. They thought I was falling right into their trap. But I was building one of my own. That afternoon I drove to a lawyer's office I'd used before. Quiet, discreet, no questions. I rewrote my will, removing Ryan entirely. I created a living trust, transferring the house and remaining assets to a local animal rescue foundation. I gave Rusty's name to the director. "In honor of the best companion I ever had," I said, voice steady. Then I visited my bank. Froze all automatic transfers. Flagged any attempts at unauthorized withdrawals. I closed the joint emergency account Ryan didn't know I knew he'd opened using my ID. And I had every remaining cent moved into a secure trust. The clerk asked if I wanted to notify the beneficiaries. I smiled. "Not yet." Next stop, pharmacy. I picked up a small bottle of activated charcoal and a pack of electrolyte tablets. I'd seen the small bottle in Ryan's hiking gear. I'd seen the label, harmless if used properly, but mixed wrong or taken too much it could trigger fainting, confusion, even seizures. I bought an identical bottle and replaced the pills inside his with harmless vitamins. Then I switched Emily's protein bars with lookalikes I'd pre-treated with sleep-inducing drops I used to give elderly clients with insomnia. Just enough to disorient. Just enough to pause them long enough for me to act. That night I sat in my room reading through an old box of letters and photographs. I hadn't opened it in years. And then, tucked between a baby photo and an ultrasound printout, I found it. The last letter from his birth mother. She'd written it right before she disappeared. I remembered how she handed me that baby, barely breathing, and said, "He needs someone stronger than me." She wasn't wrong. Ryan had been sick, fragile, and in the beginning it was terrifying. But I fought for him. I took on debt. I worked 3 jobs. I stayed up nights feeding him mashed sweet potatoes through a syringe. I loved him harder than I thought possible. But I never told him the truth. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted him to feel like he belonged. I never told him that the only reason I left my husband was because he refused to raise another woman's child. That I chose Ryan over my marriage. Over my comfort. Over everything. And now he was choosing my death over a down payment. The next morning, Emily dropped a bottle of prenatal vitamins in front of me and asked me to keep them safe during the hike. They were empty. I opened the cap. Inside were sleeping pills, crushed and wrapped in tissue. I smiled. "I'll keep them close." I packed a separate bag, hidden beneath the picnic basket, with my phone, wallet, legal papers, and a flash drive of all my audio recordings. I'd installed a recorder under the kitchen table in the guest bathroom, even in the glove box of Ryan's car. I had everything. Their conversations, their plans, the fake pregnancy discussions, and the way Ryan bragged about getting rid of the old lady without a trace. I sent a copy to my lawyer, time-stamped and backed up to the cloud. We left for the trail at dawn. Ryan drove. Emily sat up front, humming softly, eating one of the protein bars I'd tampered with. The sun was just beginning to rise behind the mountains when we reached the trailhead. Ryan helped me with my backpack like the doting son he was pretending to be. "It's going to be a beautiful day, Mom," he said. "You'll never forget it." I smiled. "Neither will you." Halfway up the ridge, the trail narrowed. Rocks jutted from the earth like bones. I felt the wind bite against my neck, cool and sharp. Ryan moved ahead. Emily started to slow, blinking rapidly, swaying on her feet. "I feel off," she muttered. "Maybe low blood sugar," I offered, handing her another bar. He took it without question. Ryan stopped near a rocky outcrop. "This is the spot," he said, loud enough to carry. "You can see the whole valley." He looked back at me, his smile thin and tight. "Come closer, Mom. Let me take a picture of you." "That's sweet," I said, walking slowly. "You always were good with cameras." I saw his hand inch toward his pocket. The same pocket that held the bottle. The one I'd already swapped. "Do you feel okay?" I asked, watching his pupils dilate. He blinked. "Fine." Then staggered. He tried to steady himself, but the world was already tilting. Emily dropped to one knee, groaning, her hands shaking. "Something's wrong." I stepped back and let the wind carry my voice. "You should sit." You look like you're about to faint. Ryan dropped to the dirt, gasping. What did you? I crouched beside him. Me? I just packed a snack like you asked. Funny how you look worse than me right now. His eyes widened. Emily tried to crawl toward him, but her limbs refused to cooperate. They weren't dying. Just weak, disoriented. And vulnerable. You were going to kill me, I whispered, pulling out my phone. But you forgot something, Ryan. I raised you. I know how you think. And I'm not as weak as I look. I stood. The wind howled behind me. The drop below was hundreds of feet. You wanted me gone. Now look at you. Flat on your face in the dirt like the child you always were. I took a photo, one for my records, and sent my location to my lawyer, my backup team, and the local ranger station. Then I sat on a nearby rock, opened a bottle of water, and waited for the sirens. The sirens arrived 20 minutes later, their echoes bouncing off the cliffs like a war cry. A park ranger named Luis reached us first, breathless and wide-eyed. He took one look at Emily, slumped against a rock, and Ryan curled in on himself like a kicked dog and immediately radioed for backup. They're not dying, I told him calmly. They just need fluids and maybe a lesson in humility. Luis blinked, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. Within 10 minutes, EMTs were setting up IVs, asking questions. I handed them my ID, my medical bag, and my phone. Everything's documented, I said. I have evidence, recordings, signed statements. You're going to want to call the police. Ryan tried to speak as they lifted him onto the stretcher. She drugged us. I didn't respond. I just handed the officer a USB drive and smiled. Let's not play who did what. Just press play. Back at the ranger station, I gave my statement. 3 officers sat across from me, jaws tightening with every clip they heard. Ryan talking about the Ridge Trail. Emily discussing the best time of day for a clean accident. Their casual cruelty, their laughter. Even the baby lie. They planned it all, I said. From the pregnancy to the life insurance. I'm not crazy. I'm not making this up. I raised that boy, but he made a choice. And so did I. By nightfall, they had enough to detain both Ryan and Emily on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and identity theft. Emily screamed when they cuffed her. Ryan looked at me like a stranger, like he was searching for some version of me that might save him. He didn't find her. News traveled fast. A local paper ran a piece with the headline, "Elderly Woman Outsmarts Children in Alleged Murder Plot." I hated the word elderly, but I liked the sound of outsmarts. The story went national. People sent me letters, emails, even flowers. Survivors of family betrayal. Strangers saying, "Thank you for standing up for yourself." I appreciated it, but I didn't feel brave. I felt empty. The kind of emptiness that doesn't come from loss, but from seeing the truth too clearly. A week later, I received a letter from Ryan. I almost threw it away, but something stopped me. His handwriting was shaky, like the guilt had finally started to settle in his bones. The letter wasn't long. Just 2 paragraphs. The first was an apology full of half-hearted regret and phrases like, "I wasn't thinking straight, and Emily made me do it." The second was a question. "Why didn't you ever tell me I was adopted?" I read that line 3 times. Then I folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. Not because I didn't want to answer, but because I already had. Every sacrifice, every birthday, every second chance, that was the answer. He just didn't understand it yet. A month passed. The DA offered Ryan a deal if he testified against Emily. He took it. Of course he did. Emily went to trial alone, and her lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of manipulation, of mental illness, of stress. But the recordings spoke louder than any defense. She was sentenced to 9 years. Ryan got 3 with possible parole in 18 months. That was the part that stung. The idea that he might walk free while I still picked up the pieces. But justice isn't neat. It's not designed for closure. It's designed for consequence. And sometimes that has to be enough. I moved out of my house 2 weeks after the sentencing. I donated most of my furniture to the local women's shelter. I gave away my winter coats. I kept only what I could fit in my car in a small storage unit. I rented a cabin in the foothills just outside Boulder. It had a porch, a garden, and a view of the sunrise. I planted lavender and rosemary. I read mystery novels. I learned how to sleep through the night again. One morning I heard a knock. I opened the door to find a familiar face, Walter Blake. He was a retired firefighter I'd met years ago at a grief support group after his wife passed. "Heard what happened," he said, holding a basket of muffins. "Thought you could use a friend." I didn't cry. I just stepped aside and let him in. We talked for hours that day. About life, about how betrayal doesn't always come from strangers, and how sometimes surviving means choosing yourself again. He didn't ask about Ryan. And I didn't offer. But that night, as we sat on the porch with mugs of tea, he said something that stayed with me. "You did everything a mother could. More even. But love doesn't mean being a martyr. Sometimes it means letting go, especially when it hurts." I nodded, staring at the stars. "Do you think he ever loved me?" Walter didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I think he loved what you gave him. But I'm not sure he ever learned how to love you back." The wind rustled the lavender. Somewhere in the distance, a fox called. And I realized for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I wasn't waiting for a different ending. I had survived. Not just the fall they planned, but the fall I never saw coming. I didn't attend Ryan's parole hearing. My lawyer advised me to send a statement, but I didn't. Not because I was indifferent, but because I finally understood that some chapters don't need to be rewritten. They just need to end. 18 months came and went. I didn't check the updates. I didn't call the courthouse. I didn't want to know. I had spent too long being defined by someone else's choices. Now I wanted to live in my own story. The cabin was quiet in the mornings, filled with bird song and the rustle of trees that danced without an audience. I learned how to make jam. I learned how to repair fences. I even started painting again, badly but with joy. Walter visited often. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. Once we sat together for an hour in complete silence, watching a thunderstorm roll across the valley. It felt more honest than any words I'd ever spoken to my son. One afternoon I received a letter, not from Ryan but from a woman named Jessica. She introduced herself as Emily's younger sister. "I don't know if you remember me," she wrote. "I was in college during the wedding. We only met once. I just wanted you to know. I'm sorry for what my sister did. She was broken long before you met her. My parents tried to cover it up, but I knew something was wrong. What she did to you, to your family, was unforgivable. I hope you found peace." I stared at the letter for a long time. There was nothing to respond to, no question, no request. Just the truth. And somehow that was enough. Months passed. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter. It helped fill the quiet, and the dogs didn't ask questions. They just needed presence. Affection. Consistency. I could offer that. One day, a volunteer coordinator approached me with a leash in hand. "This guy's been through a rough time," she said, handing me the leash. The dog at the other end was a golden retriever mix with nervous eyes and a limp. I knelt down and whispered, "Hey, sweetheart. You're safe now." He licked my hand once and leaned against my side. I named him Charlie. Charlie and I built a rhythm. Morning walks, lazy afternoons, evening stretches by the fire. I caught myself smiling more, humming while I cooked, leaving the windows open just to hear the breeze. I was healing, not in big dramatic gestures but in quiet, daily choices. I was choosing to stay alive in every sense of the word. One Sunday, Walter brought over an old photo album he'd found in his attic. "Thought you might like to see some faces from the past," he said. We sat at the kitchen table flipping through pages of firehouse barbecues, 4th of July parades, and neighborhood kids who had grown up and moved away. Then he turned to me, serious. "I need to ask you something." I nodded. "If Ryan ever showed up here, just showed up at your door, what would you do?" The question didn't shock me. I had imagined it too in weak moments. I thought about the road up the mountain, the way his voice cracked when he realized I had won. I thought about his letter, his lies, his eyes. So much like a stranger's but still inexplicably familiar. "I think," I said slowly, "I would look him in the eye and ask one question. Would you have done it? If I hadn't stopped you, would you have let me fall?" Walter nodded, understanding. "And if he said yes? Then I'd close the door," I said. "And if he said no?" I paused. "Then I'd still close the door. Because whatever answer he gives now, it doesn't undo the question being real in the first place." We didn't talk about it again. One morning, about a year after the trial, I received another letter. No return address, postmarked from Denver. Inside was a single sentence: "I hope you're still painting." There was no name, no signature, just a dried violet pressed between the folds of the paper. I placed it between the pages of my journal and didn't tell anyone. Not because I forgave, not because I forgot, but because some echoes are best left unanswered. Years later, a young woman interviewed me for a piece she was writing on resilience. She asked, "What would you tell someone who feels like they've lost everything?" I smiled. "You haven't. If you're still here, breathing, hurting, waking up anyway, you haven't lost everything. The most dangerous lie we're taught is that love means staying no matter what. But real love, real strength, is knowing when to walk away." She paused, then asked, "Do you miss him?" I looked out the window where Charlie was chasing a butterfly across the yard. "Some days," I admitted, "but I don't miss who he became. And I don't miss who I had to be to keep loving him." She closed her notebook and thanked me. I watched her drive away, then made myself a cup of tea, sat on the porch and picked up my brush. I dipped it in yellow and painted a streak across the canvas. Not because I was good at it, not because it mattered, but because it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.